But the second thing we see about this psalm is that death is a time when we must be very intentional. Now let me show you what I mean. I'll start reading, and I want you to see the 8 times that the psalmist says, I will, in the 116th Psalm. And each one of them is an intentional preparation for what's ahead. Psalm 116, I'll read it to you. I love the Lord because He's heard my voice and my supplication. Verse 2, because He has inclined His ear to me, therefore, here's the first one, it's an intentional preparation for death. Therefore, I will call upon Him as long as I live. Here's his first I will. I will call on the Lord as long as I live. Verse 3, the pains of death surrounded me, and the pangs of Sheol laid hold of me. I found trouble and sorrow. Did you know Jesus quotes that verse in Gethsemane? If you read Matthew, Jesus said, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful even unto death. And that is a translation from the Hebrew to the Greek Septuagint into the Gospels of the 116th Psalm and this third verse. Jesus was still processing this psalm and fulfilling it. This week I taught in the Men and Women's Study Jeremiah 1:12. God says, I'm watching over my word to fulfill it. Jesus was watching over the 116th Psalm, and after He had sung it with His disciples, He is fulfilling it by quoting it in the Garden of Gethsemane. So He said, the pains of death, and I have found trouble and sorrow. Verse 4, then I called upon the name of the Lord. O Lord, I implore you, deliver my soul. And it says in Hebrews 5 that with strong crying and tears, he cried out to Him who was able to deliver him. Again, Jesus is quoted as using this psalm. Verse 5, gracious is the Lord and righteous. Yes, our God is merciful. The Lord preserves the simple. I was brought very low, and He saved me. Return to your rest, O my soul, for the Lord has dealt bountifully with you. For you have delivered my soul from death, my eyes from tears, and my feet from falling. That's a beautiful section. But here's the second I will, starting in verse 9. The second of 8. He says, I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. You see, he didn't just shut down. That's the second intentional part about death. We all are dying. We're all headed toward death. Doesn't matter if you're 12 and you have a perfect blood pressure and perfect everything. All of your blood things are just exactly right. You're headed toward death. We all start dying the moment we're born. We're headed toward death. We're at different distances. But the first thing he says is, I'm going to call on the Lord as long as I'm alive. That's a great intentional statement. The second one is, right here in verse 9, I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. I'm not going to shut down. I'm not going to say, it's nothing left to live for. I'm too old and decrepit and I'm dying and I got that report and I have 3 months left to live. He said, I'm just going to live for the Lord as long as I'm in the land of the living. I'm not shutting down. I hope that you make that choice. Because we're all going to get something. They're going to say, we're going to have to put a stent in here, or you're going to have to start carrying around an oxygen tank here, or you're going to need chemo there. And people, a lot of them just shut down. They check out. They just go into this darkness. They just, I can't do anything anymore. Do everything. He says, I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living, even though I'm dying. Verse 10, I believe, therefore I spoke. I'm greatly afflicted. He says, it doesn't take away the troubles and the pain, but I'm still going to walk before the Lord, even if I'm greatly afflicted. And I said in my haste, all men are liars. What shall I render to the Lord for all of His benefits toward me? Verse 13, the third I will statement of this psalm. I will take up the cup of salvation. That's why in the Passover Seder, the third cup is called the cup of salvation. And Jesus took up that cup at the Passover and said, this cup is the new covenant that's in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. This is the cup of salvation. This is the cup you have to individually participate in. You have to personally know me. And so Jesus used this in the Last Supper. And what I see the psalmist saying here is, I'm going to take up the cup of salvation. When I see death coming, I'm going to talk about my salvation. I'm going to use it as an opportunity. I was reading about Dr. Brand and Yancey, the ones that wrote the Fearfully and Wonderfully Made duo of books. And he told about how one of his patients used to love going to the cancer care treatment because everybody there, is scared silly about whatever it is they have. And he'd sit there, and the nurse would come in to give him the clipboard, and they're so polite, and they hand him the clipboard, and they'd say, "Here you go, sir." And he'd look up and say, "Did you know I have terminal cancer?" And the nurse, is just taken back because it's not usually cheerful. And he says, "And I'm not afraid because I know where I'm going." And he just launched right into the gospel. That's an example of taking up the cup of salvation. I am not afraid. I know where I'm going. I know why I'm here. I know who knows my length of days. I know who I'm following, and I know He's taken me home. And so I don't have to worry about what's between here and there. I'll take up the cup of salvation. That's what I'm going to think about. Continuing in verse 13, he says, "And I will call upon the name of the Lord." That Hebrew future tense is there again. He says, not only am I going to take up the cup of salvation, I'm going to call on the name of the Lord. That is my heart's desire. I will call on His name. I'm going to call out to Him. One of the sweetest things during those early years of parenting is when you hear that little voice in the darkness. Maybe when the lights go out in a storm, or maybe some sound occurs, you hear, "Mommy, Mommy, Daddy." Don't you love that they cry out because they need you? The Lord loves that we cry out. He says, I'm going to call in the name of the Lord. I'm going to call out to Him. I'm going to tell Him my troubles. I'm going to tell Him I need Him. I will call in the name of the Lord. That's the fourth I will. Verse 15 has the fifth one. I will pay my vows to the Lord now in the presence of all His people. He says, I'm going to do what I've committed to do. I'm going to fulfill what I have promised to do. I have said that I'm going to serve the Lord at the end. I'm going to do that. He says, I will pay my vows to the Lord now. You notice this is all in the last lap. This psalm is all about dying. This is the death psalm. This is the most psalm about death there is in the Bible. And in the midst of that should be the greatest time of our life, because it's a time when we call upon Him as long as we live, when we walk before Him in the land of the living, when we take up the cup of salvation, when we call on His name, and when we, verse 14, pay our vows to the Lord in the presence of all His people. Do you know what that does? That blesses other people. When they see that nothing can stop us, when they see that no matter what we're struggling with as our bodies decline and the pain increases, that we pay our vows. And then here's that verse I showed you this morning. Look at verse 15. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of His saints. O Lord, truly, I am your servant. I am your servant, the son of your maidservant. You have loosed my bonds. Here's the sixth I will. I will offer to you the sacrifice of thanksgiving. You want to get out of discouragement? Start thanking the Lord. Start praising the Lord. These are called the Hallel, the praise, the offering of praise-filled thanksgiving to God. He says, I'm going to be characterized by offering to you the sacrifice of thanksgiving. That's the badge of God's saints. Empowered by the Spirit, energized by the God of glory, they just can't stop thanking God that He's prepared a home for them, that He's forgiven them of all their sins, that He's walked them through life. He's been their shepherd, like Jacob said, I've followed you. He's redeemed me from destruction. He's kept me all through my life. I, verse 17, will offer to you the sacrifice of thanksgiving. That's kind of what the Hebrews passage says. Even the fruit of our lips giving thanks to His name is a sacrifice to the Lord in Hebrews 13. That's what we need to do. Number 7 is the next part of verse 17. I will call upon the name of the Lord. That's the repeat of what's in verse 13. Same exact construction. I'm going to call on the Lord. It's so important. Call on the Lord. As you receive the Lord, so walk in Him. It says, whoever will call on the Lord will be saved. And that's how we received Him. And calling on Him is how we're to walk through life. Never stop calling upon the name of the Lord for help, for strength. And finally, verse 18 is the last I will. I will pay my vows to the Lord now in the presence of all His people. It's a repeat of verse 14. Isn't it interesting that they emphasize two things? Remembering our salvation by calling on the name of the Lord as we received Him. We just keep calling on Him. And fulfilling our vows to be a living sacrifice, to serve Him all of our days. So the 116th Psalm shows us that we should be very intentional as our life begins to ebb. The 116th Psalm also reminds us of Christ's favor that lasts for a lifetime. Note the psalmist, how he looks at life. Look at verse 1. It's in the past. It says in verse 1, I love the Lord because He has heard my voice. He's heard it in the past. He says the same thing in verse 4. But look at the present. He says, I love the Lord now. He's heard my voice in the past, but I love Him now. That's the present. And then, look at the future in verse 2. He says there, because He's inclined His ear to me, therefore I will. I will. So He says, He's heard my voice in the past. I love Him now. I will. See, the Lord encompasses all parts of the psalmist's life, past, present, and future.